Today we're going to talk about how to find legal forms. There are two basic kinds of legal forms, litigation and transactional. Litigation forms are forms used in court. These are often called practice or pleading forms. If you see something called like federal practice forms or federal pleadings, those are going to be litigation forms. The other kind, which you're going to focus on today, are transactional forms. These are like contracts, for example. These are often called generally legal forms, or occasionally you'll see the older language instruments. There are three basic places to find forms: in general form books, in subject-specific treatises, or in forms databases. General form books are large multi-volume sets of books that are filled with forms. So here's an example of one. This is Amjur legal forms from our library. You'll see it's a large set that contains forms. They are organized topically in alphabetical order. The name Amjur may sound familiar. It's American Jurisprudence Legal Forms, which is the same publisher of American Jurisprudence, the encyclopedia. And it's organized the exact same way, topically in alphabetical order. General form books usually include a general explanation of the area of law. So for example, if we were working on adoption papers, if you turn to the adoption section, which would be topically in alphabetical order, it will open with a general explanation of the area of law. And this is usually a couple paragraphs, maybe a page, explaining adoption law. There's also usually a scope note that will tell you what this form is intended to cover. So maybe the adoption section only covers where there is a voluntary termination of parental rights. And it will tell you that in the scope note, so that you know that if you are dealing with involuntary termination, you need to go somewhere else. They often will include checklists of minimum information that needs to be included in the document. So this is usually just a list. For example, if we're talking about the adoption again, the name of the person who's being adopted, that would be something that's probably going to be on the checklist. And then often there'll be definitions of terms of art. If there are specific terms that are used in that area of law, they will often be defined in the beginning. Contracts and form books are grouped by subject, like I said. And this is helpful because it makes it easy to select the most relevant one. So you know you want an adoption contract, but there are many different kinds of adoption contracts. And you can see sort of the selection by turning to the adoption section, and you can pick the most relevant one. The other good news is that most of these are available online in Westlaw Next or Lexis Advance. As I showed you, we do have print versions in the library, but most students prefer to use the online versions. Most people really, particularly because with forms, it's much nicer to be able to copy and paste the text rather than to have to retype it. So there are four biggie general form book sets: American Jurisprudence Legal Forms, which is the one that I showed you in the picture, Nichols' Cyclopedia of Legal Forms, West's Legal Forms, and Rabkin and Johnson's Current Legal Forms. And they're online on different platforms. The first three, you'll see I have WLN. That's because those three are in Westlaw Next. And then Current Legal Forms is available on Lexis Advance. And you need to remember that in order to access them online. To access form books online, you log on to either Westlaw Next or Lexis Advance, and you slow type the title of the form book into the search bar, and you don't hit enter. I made a video demonstrating this. To access form books on Westlaw Next, the first thing you need to do is go to www.lawschool.westlaw.com and enter your login information. After you sign on, you need to click on the Westlaw Next button at the very top. Once you land on this page, if you're looking for a specific resource, such as American Jurisprudence Forms, you simply type in the title. If you don't hit enter, Westlaw Next will give you a list of suggested resources that it thinks you're looking for. And this is where you'll find your form book. So simply click on the resource you want, and it brings me to the table of contents for the American Jurisprudence Legal Forms. Now I have two options at this point. I can browse by clicking on any of these links, and it will take me deeper into the table of contents, or I can do a keyword search up at the top. If you'll notice, the tab is on American Jurisprudence Legal Forms, which means I'm only searching this resource. If I want to search all content again, I can click here. This would just be doing a general search. To search for legal forms on Lexis Advance, first go to lexisnexus.com/lawschool and log in. Then click on this Go to Lexis Advanced button. From this page, all you need to do is type in the name of the resource you're looking for, in this case, Current Legal Forms. Do not hit enter, and you will have some resources suggested for you. Here's Rabkin and Johnson, Current Legal Forms. If you click on this here, it will add it as a filter, or you can click on Table of Contents to browse. And that's it. The second place to find forms are in subject-specific treatises. So treatises are books written by experts on specific subjects. So some examples are Lindy on entertainment law, Wilson on contracts, Nimmer on copyright, and many, many, many more. And these are basically just books explaining that area of law. Now, many, but not all treatises include forms. In general, I'd say that more do than don't now, but not all of them do contain forms. In general, the more practice-oriented they are, the more likely they are to include forms. So if it says something like desk book or a practical guide on the title, then it's more likely to include forms. Also, the more narrow the subject matter, the more likely they are to include forms. So a treatise on construction law is more likely to contain forms than something enormous like Dobbs on torts. So just keep that in mind. These subject-specific treatises, their forms are often better than the forms in general form books for a couple reasons. One, they're written by named experts in the field. So for example, Lindy on entertainment law. Lindy put his name on that publication, so you know who wrote it. You don't know who wrote the Amjur forms. Anybody could. Now, there is an editor and they do have staff attorneys, but you don't know if the person who wrote the publishing contract, it was their first day ever doing anything in publishing. Subject-specific treatises are usually either written by faculty members who are experts in their area or by practitioners. For example, Cohn on music licensing is written by Bob Cohn, and he's been practicing music licensing law for 50 plus years. So you know that the people who write these treatises and who choose these forms are experts in their area of law. The other reason that subject-specific treatises are often better than general form books is because they provide a lot more explanation. In the general form books, the point of those publications are the forms, and the legal explanation commentary are a byproduct. In treatises, it's the opposite. The whole purpose of the publication is to explain the area of law, and the forms are the byproduct. So you're going to get pages and pages of explanation, and then a form that they chose is a good example. So for example, I pulled two publishing forms, one from Amjur Legal Forms and one from Lindy on entertainment law. The one from Amjur was 8 pages long, whereas the one from Lindy was 25 pages long. And here it is on Westlaw. And you'll notice that it has the actual text of the form. And then down here, it's interspersed with these practice comments. And this is probably, I don't know, a page and a half of notes explaining the difference between primary and subsidiary rights and why they chose the clauses they did. So you're going to find much more of this type of thing, practice comments, in treatises than you are in general form books. So how do you locate treatises on your topic? With the other forms, it was pretty easy. There are 4 major books. You just need to know the titles, and you can do a general form search. Locating treatises on your topic are a little trickier. Fortunately, there are several tools out there to help. The first is the Georgetown Treatise Finder, and this is terrific. Basically, what the librarians over at Georgetown have done is that they have collected all the major treatises for the major areas of law. So let's do entertainment law, and I'll show you what I mean. So here is a list of the entertainment law treatises that they have available. You'll notice they put these handy icons, and here's a key, and they let you know which one is a preeminent treatise, and then they let you know which ones are available on Westlaw, Lexis, or Bloomberg. Now this is a caveat, this is made for the Georgetown Law Library, so it's built around their collection. However, Georgetown has a fantastic collection, so they're going to have the preeminent treatises, and they're going to be listed here. The only problem may be the opposite. We may not have books that they list here. However, usually we can order them through interlibrary loan. Another tool are legal research guides. Legal research guides are created by law librarians across the country. And basically what they are annotated bibliographies listing out the best resources on any given subject. And a publication came out recently in Legal Reference Services Quarterly, where the authors of an article tried to count the number of legal research guides that are available. And there are over 5,000. And they didn't count them all because I know that they did not include ours. So there are a lot of these out there, and they are on every topic available. I mean, the obvious ones like administrative law, but also obscure ones like Arctic law or animal law or international animal law. There are many, many research guides. And these are great because they'll list out things like the treatises in a certain area of law. So here's an example. Here's one from Duke on environmental law. And they're all organized differently and depending on who wrote them. So they're all a little different, but they all are annotated bibliographies. So if you scroll down, here is secondary sources, which is usually the heading you're going to want to look for since we're looking for treatises. And here's a list of all the treatises on this area of law. So, environmental law, treatise on environmental law, those are probably good places to start. And then one thing I want to show you is if you remember nothing else that I tell you in this presentation, remember this. If you Google Forms Legal Research Guide, there are dozens of legal research guides listing all the many places that you can find forms. So, once you have the title of the treatise that you want, how do you find them? In print, you can obviously come to our library, do a catalog search just like you would for any other book. To access them online, you do it the exact same way that you do the general form books. You either log on to Westlaw or Lexis, whichever one has the treatise that you're interested in, and slow type the title into the search bar. Don't hit enter, and the drop-down list will appear, and you can select the treatise that you are interested in. There's also another way that you can access treatises on Westlaw and Lexis. You can browse. So in Westlaw, you'd go down to secondary sources, since treatises are secondary sources, and you can browse by topic. There are some listed here. However, you'll get a more complete list if you click on texts and treatises. You'll notice they have more listed. And then if you select one of these, we'll do art, entertainment, and sports law again, you'll get a list of all the treatises they have on this topic. It's not always clear what exactly these publications are. You'd hope that they're treatises, but it says texts, and it's not obvious what is included as a text. To find out, just enter the item and click on this little I, and it will explain to you what it is. To browse for forms and subject-specific treatises on Lexis Advance, click on the Browse button in the top left corner. Next, select Sources, and then select By Category. You might be tempted to choose By Practice Area, but I don't recommend that you do because that's going to include all the different kinds of sources, cases, statutes, that kind of thing, and we're really only interested in secondary sources and forms. So select By Category, and then you have two good options at this point. One, you can click on Secondary Materials, which includes all the secondary materials, or you can pick Forms specifically. And since we're looking for forms, I would start there. These are all the different resources that have forms on Lexis Advance. You can narrow by practice area by using the filter bar on the left. So go down to Practice Areas and Topics, and you can see the full list. And let's just pick Business and Corporate Law. And you'll see here we've got 26 business and corporate law resources that include forms. It's not always clear, just like in Westlaw Next, what exactly these resources are, so you can click on the I to get more information. And then I highly recommend, if it's an option, to browse the table of contents. That's usually the most helpful way for me to get into a resource. So if you click on one of these tables of contents, you can see all the different sections in that resource. Or you can click on this little arrow and add it as a search filter. If you add it as a search filter, you'll notice here it's listed, and this is all that is going to be searched if I type in a search. So if I typed in a certain kind of form or a search term and hit this magnifying glass, it's only going to search forms from business crime because that's the resource I picked. Okay, and the third place to find forms are in forms databases. Form databases are simply forms uploaded into an online bank that are searchable, although some are browsable, or they are forms that are aggregated from a bunch of different books. So on Westlaw Next and Lexis Advance, what they've done is they've taken the many different books that contain forms, pulled those forms, and combined them together in a searchable database. The 5 major places that we are going to talk about today are Westlaw Next's Form Finder, Lexis Advance, Gale Legal Forms Library, Bloomberg Law, and then I'm going to spend a minute or two talking about free resources that you can find on the web. So Westlaw Next Form Finder is just a database containing many of the forms available in Westlaw Next. However, I will say that they have very few subject-specific treatises. So here we are, included in Form Finder. This is the list of what they have available. You'll notice they have Amjur legal forms, which we've talked about. They also have Nichols Cyclopedia of Legal Forms and West Legal Forms. So the big 3 general form books. You can search all of them here. Well, you'll notice the rest of these are state-specific legal forms for the most part. There are a couple treatises. Williston on Contracts is one. Uniform Commercial Code legal forms, but not a whole lot of of subject-specific treatises. Excuse me. To access them, you log into Westlaw Next and click the link for Forms, and that takes you inside the Westlaw Next Form Finder. And here you can either search, and this will search all forms, or you can narrow. So if you only want to search North Carolina forms, for example, or if you're only interested in art, entertainment, and sports form, you could narrow by topic and then do your search only within those forms. Lexis Advance is very similar. However, Lexis includes many more publications. Now, I know you can't read what is on here, but the point is that there are a lot of resources. So we'll zoom in on one so you can get an idea of the kinds of things that are included. And you can see that many are state-specific, so you see we have a lot from California on this page, but many are from subject-specific treatises. So you'll see here from Collier, which is bankruptcy, Guide to Toxic Torts, and some of these state-specific ones are from, forms from California Real Estate Law and Practice. So those are subject-specific. They're just also jurisdictionally specific as well. Now, I will say I don't know who has more forms. Just because Westlaw has fewer resources does not mean they have fewer forms, because they have 3 of the major general form books, whereas Lexis Advance only has 1. So I can't say that they have more forms, they just have them from a wider range of resources. To search forms on Lexis Advance, log in and then click on the little filters button inside the search bar. Then over on the left, select category, and then tick the little box for forms. And then you'll notice now it says I have 1 filter. So whatever you search in this search box is only going to search within the forms database. The next resource is Gale Legal Forms Library, and this is a collection of North Carolina specific forms. I have the path for how to get there listed here. However, I'm going to walk through it real quick. So from the Law Library webpage, click on the link to Databases, and here you'll find listed all the databases that you have access to as a student here at Campbell. Click on L because we are looking for Legal Forms Library, and it's located right here. If you are off campus, when you click this link, you'll be prompted to log in through the proxy server, which just uses the same login as your Blackboard. If you're on campus, it will take you directly there. And you're there. This is not as searchable as Lexis and Westlaw Next, and it's actually probably better to browse. So you can go either by main categories, most popular, and then down here these are browse sample searches. So these are searches that are popular they have put up here that you can just click. You can search by category or title, so if you want to do it that way, that's also fine. Next, we're going to talk about Bloomberg Law. Bloomberg Law has a much more limited collection of secondary sources than Westlaw Next or Lexis Advance. However, it does have a few resources that are worth noting and that are unique to Bloomberg Law. One area that Bloomberg Law has focused on extensively is corporate law. More so than either Westlaw Next or Lexis Advance, and they have a really unique collection. One thing that they have done is that they have mined Edgar for real legal documents that were filed with the SEC, Edgar is the SEC e-filing system. So they've gone into Edgar, and they have pulled all these contracts that companies have filed with the SEC and collected them into a database called Dealmaker Documents. A couple of caveats. Because Bloomberg Law is pulling these contracts only from Edgar, they are only by companies that have to file with Edgar. So those are going to be large publicly traded companies. And also, a company does not have to file every contract they enter into. They only need to file material contracts. So basically, only the big contracts by big companies. However, there is a wide variety of different kinds of contracts, from employment agreements to purchase agreements to easements. So let's go ahead and take a look at Bloomberg Law Dealmaker Documents. So here's Bloomberg Law. After you log in, this is the landing page. And I like to go to Transactional Law, the tab, and then click Transactional Resources, because it's really a practice center where they have gathered all the transactional resources in one spot. So here is Search Document Database. Our Dealmaker Document Database houses over 800,000 publicly available agreements sorted by experienced attorneys into more than 500 categories. So let's take a look at some examples. Now you have a couple different options. You can search. You've got a bunch of different search options, keywords, document types, or you can browse. So let's pick one. Let's look at, say, employment agreements or employment termination agreements. How about separation agreements? You see was added. This makes it a filter. So if I had more keywords, I could add them, more other search filters that I wanted to add, or you can just hit search, and this is going to give me all the separation agreements in their database. You see they're listed here. Look how recent these are. It is only January 14th, so these are about a week old, and they're in reverse chronological order. So let's just pick one and take a look at it. So here's the full text of the agreement, so you can read the agreement, or you have the option to look at a clause outline, so you can see all the different clauses. This is particularly helpful in a really long contract. And then the really neat thing is their draft analyzer. So if you run the draft analyzer, it's this big orange button here. What Draft Analyzer does is that it does a clause-by-clause comparison between this contract and other contracts like it to show you quickly what language other firms use in similar contracts. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so this is for this clause. You see I've got a red line and a template. So if I click the red line, you can see changes that have been made between this one. They have 4 major templates and then 34 sources that they have used to create this red line. But it's really very interesting. It's just a good way to quickly compare different language that different firms actually use in this kind of agreement. Let's go back to our transactional law resources, and I'll show you some other things that they offer. So they also have this section on drafting guidance. So these are just what it says, guidance on drafting documents. These are mostly created in-house by BNA. And they're just sort of summaries about what you want to include and how to draft these kinds of materials. Again, the focus is going to be on corporate law. Next, they have forms. These are what you think of as a traditional form, what we've been looking at during this entire presentation. Again, mostly this is going to be corporate because that is Bloomberg Law's focus. However, there are a few that are not. So here is a collection of the forms from the Alibaba library. And let's look under miscellaneous forms. And there's a few. There's a talent contract provision, prenup and post-nup agreements, elder law documents, so a few other forms that are not corporate. Next, we're going to talk about portfolios. Portfolios are basically just practitioner-oriented secondary sources that are organized by topic of law. So go to BNA Portfolios. I went to Search and Browse, and then under Browse BNA Portfolios. Again, the focus is going to be on corporate law, but there are some that are not. So for example, here's the Health Law and Business Portfolio series. So let's take a look at an example. And these typically follow a set layout. There's going to be a topic, there's going to be a description, a detailed analysis, and then a section called working papers. And this sometimes includes forms, also things like checklists, what you'd consider as practice tools. So this is another place where you can find forms on a limited variety of topics. One last place where you can find forms in Bloomberg Law is in their Books and Treatises library. So I went to search and browse Books and Treatises. And this is their general collection of secondary sources. They're organized by publisher, which is not helpful to people who aren't librarians. For example, most people probably don't know what kinds of books James Publishing publishes. However, the rest are pretty straightforward. One of particular note to North Carolinians is the North Carolina CLE Continuing Legal Education Collection. So let's look at that. Now these are secondary sources, subject-specific treatises that we had talked about earlier, and some of them include forms. A quick way to do that would be to pick one that looks like it's on your topic, do a quick form search, and this looks like adoption forms maybe. Okay, and let's scroll down. Oh, there we go. At the end of this chapter, it looks like they've included a lot of forms for adoption. So adoption, North Carolina adoption forms, definitely not corporate law, but they do have some materials like that. And as far as I know, at least at the time I was recording this, no other database, Westlaw Next or Lexis Advance have North Carolina CLE publications. So that is definitely of interest if you are practicing in North Carolina. Okay, and lastly, free resources that are available on the web. If you Google free legal forms, you will get many results. And some websites like FindLaw, Justia, and Electric Law Library are some of the results that are going to pop up. However, usually only practice and court forms are free. This is because courts will publish a lot of their forms available for people to use, and what these websites will do is they will go and collect those forms and make them available through their site. So these are going to be practice forms. There are very few free general legal forms for transactions. Also, there's no explanation or editorial content usually provided with these forms, so there's not going to be any of the explanation of the area law or anything like that. And lastly, you don't know who wrote them. At least, certainly with subject-specific treatises, you know who wrote them. You know it's an expert. With AMJUR, at least you know it's gone through an editorial process with staff attorneys. With the online free legal forms, you don't have the faintest idea who wrote them. So while you can certainly use them, I would use them with a tablespoon of salt, maybe a shovelful. And also, while you're a law student, you have access to so many better resources that I highly recommend you use Westlaw, LexisNexis, Gale, or any of the many books we have in the library, as opposed to just doing a free Google search. So there you have it. The 5 major places to find forms databases, and the 3 major places to find forms in general. If you have any questions, of course, you can always stop by my office. I'm on the 2nd floor of the law library, right behind the circulation desk. Thanks. Places to find forms in general.